Those of you who give me some feedback about what I had to say. If you didn't get to hear that, it's online. I'm trying to go through the alphabet in order, and I went from Grace G to H, and somehow I was from G to I and forgot H in the middle. I did it again. And so we're sort of going retrograde here and stepping back to the letter H to because I want to go through this alphabet. Just so you know where we're going with this. So next week will be the last of this series. We're going to do J. And I actually don't know what the topic will be. I've got all your forms with your suggestions on them, and I'll pick one this week. So, and then starting in October and through into November, we're going to look at the Gospel of John, start through the series of Gospel of John. Then we're going to do Advent. Then we're going to go back to the alphabet over the summer and work our way to K and a little bit more through the alphabet. And then we'll continue in John in the beginning of the new year. So that's my intention for preaching in the next coming 6-8 months. So you know where we're going. This morning, we're going to be on the letter H. Now, I had a whole bunch of forms in front of me, and the vast majority of your feedback was you wanted a message on heaven. And we kind of touched on it a little bit when I looked at eternity. We did death and eternity back a few weeks ago. And so I thought, since we kind of brushed along that shoreline, I thought I would do something different. And this word hide, I don't know whose choice this was. This intrigued me because I wasn't sure if they meant cow hides or buffalo hides or what they actually meant here. And so I thought, well, we'll just see what we can do with this word hide. And so the first thing I did was I looked up the word hide in the Bible and find all its usages, and it will become of no surprise to you the word hide means exactly what it sounds like. It means to conceal or to hide. Our lives are hidden with Christ in God. God hides us under the shelter of our wings. Like we sing that song, Rock of Ages, cleft for me, let me hide myself in you. So the idea of hide means to conceal or be hidden, and it just means what it means. So I'm reading through Bible verses that have this word hide in it, and I got to the New Testament, and these are the words that jumped off the page at me, and so we're going to do this morning, and as I said to you, we're going to do a little bit of hard work. So I'm reading from Luke's Gospel and chapter 12, and I'm starting at the first verse. I'll give you a minute if you've got a Bible and you want to get to it. This is Luke in chapter 12. Meanwhile, a crowd of many thousands came together so that they were trampling on one another. He began to say to his disciples first, "Be on your guard against the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. There is nothing covered that will not be uncovered, and nothing hidden that will not be made known. Therefore, whatever you have said in the dark will be heard in the light, and what you have whispered in the ear in private rooms will be proclaimed on the housetops." So that verse 2 there about that which is hidden will become uncovered is what jumped out to me, and so we're going to look at that here this morning. Now, the context of Jesus' teaching here in verse 2 about what is hidden and uncovered is clearly hypocrisy, because hypocrites hide. They hide behind a mask, and most of us know the idea of a hypocrite coming from that Greek word of the play actors wearing a mask and playing a part. Hypocrisy, those who hide behind masks, is a form of impression management. Now, impression management, there's a guy named Irving Goffman. Some of you may have heard of Irving Goffman. Irving Goffman is a sociologist and social psychologist, and he described impression management as the process of creating, influencing, or manipulating an image held by your audience. And what he's saying as a sociologist is that everybody is on a stage and everybody's playing a part, and we are surrounded by our audience, and we try to impress upon you and give you an image of who we want you to think we are. The objective of impression management is to control the behavior of you, the audience, especially in response to the performance that I'm putting on, so that you see things the way I want you to see them. This is the idea of impression management. This is, in fact, helps to describe hypocrisy. The hypocrite is engaged in impression management. I want you to see a me that I have idealized, not the real me. I don't want you to see who I really am. I want you to see who I want you to think I am. And so this is the role of the hypocrite. So the actor hides behind a mask, puts on a face, plays a part. It's our public face as opposed to our private face. It's not the real us, it's the us we want others to see. To repeat myself, hypocrites hide behind a mask and attempt to manage the impression that the audience has of them. Now, there are two true things about hypocrites and hypocrisy. One is that every single person here in this room can think of somebody who's a hypocrite. You know a hypocrite. And the second thing you're absolutely certain about is it isn't you, right? This is a truism for every one of us in this room. We know a hypocrite and it isn't us. It's much easier to see hypocrisy and be judgmental about it in others than ourselves. One of the things that I did when I was preparing this message this week is I found a journal article of people who did some research on hypocrisy. And what the research shown is that if you were asked to demonstrate or give a thought or a way in which you acted like a hypocrite, you would come up with an example which is easily forgivable. But then when you were asked to think of an example of someone who was a hypocrite, you would come up with a really egregious, unforgivable example. So we're really, really ready to judge the other's hypocritical behavior, and we're really ready to forgive it in ourselves because we're such hypocrites. The greatest insult that any person in a church can throw at another person is that they're a hypocrite. Especially when you're having a church argument about the color of the chairs or the drapes or whether you should do building extensions or whatever the stupid thing is that churches love to argue about, and you end up in this great conflict. Well, you're just a hypocrite. That's designed to end the argument. It's a four-letter word. The reality is, if we're prepared to be honest with ourselves, is that we are all hypocrites to some extent. Even the great Apostle Paul was a hypocrite. If hypocrites are people who say one thing and do another, then this describes Paul. The thing I want to do is not the thing I do, and the thing I don't want to do is the thing I do. That's the description of a hypocrite. Now, let's not fool ourselves into thinking that all of this phoniness is a level playing field. I might wear a watch that doesn't work. That might make me a hypocrite. I might wear a leather jacket that's really plastic. That makes me a hypocrite. I want you to think I can afford leather. I can't afford leather. There are some forms of hypocrisy that we're prepared to sort of forgive. But let's not fool ourselves into thinking this is all a level playing field, because the kind of hypocrisy that Jesus is condemning here is of another magnitude order as well. So let's work our way through hypocrisy. And a general definition of it is when I say I believe one thing and do another. This inconsistency in belief between what I do and what I say I believe is at the heart of all forms of hypocrisy. But we don't often perceive this inconsistency necessarily as hypocrisy or unforgivable. I'll give you an example. Who in this room would not agree with the statement that prayer changes things, or that God conforms us into his image by meditating and studying and reading his word, and that it's an important form of our sanctification is to be involved in the word of God? And yet who here prays as often as they really should? Or who reads the word of God as much as they ought? And so even though technically this is hypocrisy, because I say we really should pray because it changes things, and the fact that I don't pray so much, that's actually hypocrisy. Yet we're prepared to kind of forgive that in one another if the belief is sincere and noble, and where the sentiment is intentional and the intentions are pure. We're prepared to forgive this kind of inconsistency, this form of hypocrisy. The kind of hypocrisy that we tend to be a little bit more jaded about is the kind when there's intent behind the deficient behavior. It's the do as I say, not as I do kind of hypocrisy. This is what really gets us riled. There is a form of hypocrisy, which is the hypocrisy of pretense, where I make a profession that I have a certain character or a certain quality that I actually don't have, and I know I don't have it. And I tell this about myself to you in order to get something from you. This kind of hypocrisy, we're not so quick to forgive. This is the kind of impression management where there's a benefit to me for you to think something about me that isn't true. And I know it isn't true, and my motivation is not noble and pure. In fact, my motivation is entirely selfish. But I want you to think these things about myself and will hide behind this insincere mask because I think that the end game, the part I'm playing, justifies the act that I'm putting on. Now, you'll know this person. It's lots and lots of politicians. Politicians have this kind of hypocrisy about them. It's a pretense. They tell you that they are the party or the politician of family values. What he's not telling you is that he's got a mistress that he keeps in an apartment in the city that no one knows about, and he pays for her abortions. But he doesn't tell you this because if you knew this, this wouldn't suit his needs. And he thinks that getting elected is more important than the truth about who he really is. They will tell you whatever they think you want to hear about the kind of person that they are or should be in order to get power, to get something from you. This is the hypocrisy of pretense. Then there's the blaming kind of hypocrisy. It's the pot calling the kettle black. Maybe I would stand here in the pulpit and have this kind of moral indignation that people aren't giving enough money to the church or to the building program, or people aren't praying enough. And my motivation for doing this is not the moral, theological grounds for why I'm so angry, but it's in fact to get the moral ground over you. To get the high moral ground, that I can somehow control you if I can shame you or blame you or guilt you for not living up to a standard that even I don't live up to. But I'm not telling you that. In words that Jesus would use, I haven't got a log out of my own eye, but I'm more than happy to tell you about the log in yours. A common example of this kind of hypocrisy is pastors getting in the pulpit and condemning adultery and sexual sin while having an affair. And this kind of blaming hypocrisy is done to maintain control over the church and their authority or position that they might have. And it's particularly insidious when they happen to know the secret sins of the people in the church and they're beating them over the head with their behaviors. And the purpose of this kind of impression management, this kind of hypocrisy, this mask hiding, is in order for me to get or maintain control. Like pretense, there is a benefit to me to hide behind this mask, to put on this act. Another kind of hypocrisy is the hypocrisy of complacency. I claim to possess some kind of moral belief that requires a great deal from me, but I only do the easy things that those beliefs require. So in contrast to pretense, where I pretend to have the characters or beliefs in order to gain reward, with complacency, I really do have those characters and beliefs, but I don't want to do the hard, costly things necessary to live it out. So here's an example that we might be familiar with. Shalom is doing this great drug and alcohol rehab stuff in the city. And most of us would say drug and alcohol rehab and doing that kind of hard work to get people away from the violence and the drug addiction is a really powerful and important thing, and we're all for it, and it's a great Jesus thing, until they want to build the center next to your house. And then suddenly, now, not in my backyard. That is the hypocrisy of complacency. It's the easy thing is to trumpet my virtue, the virtue signaling of this. The hard thing is to actually put my money where my mouth is. Or we believe in peacemaking, but instead spend a great time in peacekeeping. Peacemaking requires truth and honesty and vulnerability and confession and repentance and forgiveness and a lot of hard work. Peacekeeping is easy. All I have to do is say, we're just going to agree to differ and walk away. We say we believe in the hard thing of peacemaking, but we do the peacekeeping. Christianity is a hard religion. C.S. Lewis said that I didn't go to religion to make me happy, meaning Christianity. I always knew a bottle of port would do that. If you want a religion to make you feel really comfortable, I certainly don't recommend Christianity. So Christianity requires a great deal from us, and we're happy to trumpet our beliefs, but the hypocrisy of complacency is when we're not actually prepared to do the hard work that our beliefs say we believe. The thing about this form of hypocrisy is that it's not just about doing the easy part, it's about trumpeting my character and beliefs so that people could hear that I really believe in drug and alcohol rehab. I want you to know that this is what I think. What I don't want you to know is I don't want to do the hard things. And in fact, associated with all these forms of hypocrisy is the very public pronouncement of what we believe or who we are and what we do or what we require of others. We want to trumpet that very loudly. We're playing to an audience and not just lying to ourselves. I forgot the thing. Sorry. In this pocket. So these are the species of hypocrisy. All hypocrisy has some form of inconsistency associated with it. We say one thing and do another. And there's a hypocrisy of pretense and blaming and complacency. And there are many genera of hypocrisy. There's a political hypocrisy and philosophical hypocrisy and academic hypocrisy. But the one genus that Jesus is primarily concerned with, and which this passage in Luke is speaking with, is religious hypocrisy. Luke, here in Luke chapter 12, calls it the leaven of the Pharisees, the religious rulers of his day. So let's see some biblical examples of what this looks like, this inconsistency, pretense, blaming, and complacency. And a good place to do that, keep a place in Luke 12 if you have it, but we're going to go to Matthew in chapter 23. In Matthew chapter 23, Jesus is condemning his Pharisees. Woe to you, Pharisee hypocrites. Of all the people in the Bible that you're most likely to assign the word hypocrite to is going to be the Pharisees, because it seems that that's their last name in Jesus' mouth. Pharisee, hypocrite. Chapter 23 of Matthew, then Jesus spoke to the crowds and to his disciples. The scribes and the Pharisees are seated in the chair of Moses. Now, there wasn't actually a chair. It's like saying a person is a chairman of the board. There isn't actually a chair. It's a position that they held. It's basically they have the authority to speak. They sit in the seat of Moses, meaning they're in positions of leadership and speak with the authority of the scriptures. And notice what Jesus says here. Therefore, do whatever they tell you and observe it. These guys are not heretics. They speak the truth. They know the law of God and they speak it rightly. You can't fault their theology. Perhaps you've met this kind of guy. They can answer rightly all the questions. They might be the director of ministry in a seminary or a doctorate program, some seminary somewhere. They write books and they go to seminars and they speak publicly and have podcasts. They might be your pastor. I'm aware of the fact that people ask me lots of questions, and I sit in a seat of Moses, effectively in a position of authority, and I pontificate all the time, and people ask me questions and I seem to have answers, and they seem to be orthodox. This is the point he's making here. But the behavior is not matching the theology. They aren't heretics, they're hypocrites. And Jesus makes it plainly clear. Chapter 23, verse 3, they do not practice what they preach. That's the definition of a hypocrite. Do not practice what you preach. So this is the hypocrisy of inconsistency. But the way that Jesus is emphasizing this is not the kind of Romans 7, well, not everyone can get it right because we're impacted by sin and sin gets its way in us and our motivations are noble. It's clear that Jesus is not prepared to just dismiss this kind of hypocrisy, that they're doing their best kind of thing. There is a pattern of behavior that's a reflection of their character, and this is what he's condemning. Firstly, notice in verse 4 of chapter 23 is the hypocrisy of blame. They tie up heavy loads that are hard to carry and put them on people's shoulders, but they themselves aren't willing to lift a finger to lift them. So they're standing in the seat of Moses and letting people know of all their failures and how they're failing to live up to the standard that God has determined that the way they should live. And it's the law of God. If you try to live according to the detail of it, is enormously difficult. And what he's saying here is that not only are they not helping these people live the lives that they're asking them to live, they actually don't live those lives themselves. But they're using this kind of blame here and this kind of blaming hypocrisy in order to maintain their position of control and authority over the people. You see a similar kind of thing in John in chapter 8, where Jesus is with the woman who was caught in adultery, and they bring her to Jesus, and Jesus starts writing in the dirt, and we have no idea what he's writing there, but I'm fairly certain that he's writing the names of these guys and their sins. This is Jacob, theft, Zacchaeus, adultery. And then Jesus looks up and says, "He who's without sin cast the first stone." This is what the theology of the hypocrisy of blaming looks like. That I'm going to condemn you for all these kinds of things, even when I don't live up to myself. And my reason for doing it is to maintain and have control over you. In more modern language, it's a form of spiritual abuse, where I seek to control you spiritually with forms of behavior that even I don't live up to. Secondly, there is the hypocrisy of pretense. They do everything to be seen by others. Chapter 23, verse 5, there's the pretense. They enlarge their phylacteries and lengthen their tassels. This is just the external versions of the religion. They're just putting on a show, right? Because this is what hypocrites do. They're playing to an audience. And look what they get as a result of playing to the audience. They get the place of honor at banquets and the front seats in the synagogues and the greeting in the marketplace. They get all the rewards and all the perks of pretending to be the people that they say they are. So because, it works, because I'm a good Bible teacher, they would say, and I sit in the seat of Moses and I look the part, the assumption is I am the part. And I'm playing the part and I get to keep the benefits of the part. This is the hypocrisy of pretense. They're not the people they say they are, but they pretend they are because there's great reward in being those people. They're doing these things intentionally because they have much to gain and much to lose if they're exposed and their masks fall off. It's no wonder, given what they had to lose, that they reacted with such violence when Jesus exposed them. In fact, it's one of the key markers of pretentious hypocrisy. How do people act when they're exposed? And a little bit later on in Matthew chapter 23, verse 23, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You pay a tenth of mint and dill and cumin, and yet you have neglected the more important matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faithfulness." Just as a tie-in to last week's message about the land, I mentioned in Bible study the tithe is about the produce of the land, because who does the land belong to? It belongs to God. And so since the land belongs to God, the rent that you pay God is a tenth of the produce of the land, and the tenth of the produce of the land was then given to God's servant in the temple, which were the priests. And what Jesus is saying here, it is right for these Pharisees in this agricultural economy, who had no land, essentially, they just lived in the towns and cities, but they would have had herb gardens. A tenth of that land belongs to God, even if it's just the herbs and the tomatoes and the lemons that you grow on your trees. You pick that bit, and that Jesus is saying that's the right thing to do. But here you see very plainly the hypocrisy of complacency, because the thing they really should be concerned about is the stuff that's hard to do, which is justice and mercy and faithfulness. I proclaim I'm this great holy person until it costs me too much, until it's too hard, and then I'm not going to do it. Later on, he goes, next verse, "You have neglected mercy and faithfulness. These things you should have done without neglecting the others, blind guides. You strain out a gnat, but gulp down a camel." If you want a definition of complacency, hypocrisy, that's it. I'm prepared to strain out gnats and swallow camels. Let's go back to Luke in chapter 12, because I want to do a little application here, the way this applies. And I want to ask the question in Luke in chapter 12, who is Jesus' audience here for this teaching? Who is he saying this to? He began to say to his disciples first. So Jesus' port of call here, his teaching here, are for those who claim to be the disciples of Jesus. The recipients of his teaching is disciples, those who say, I am a follower of Jesus. Jesus is letting people who follow him know that they run the risk of becoming religious hypocrites. And he's warning them. And although we might want to be prepared to readily forgive each other over our own hypocrisy, can I suggest that the world who observes us will not? I was speaking to someone just yesterday. He was a counselor, a Christian and a counselor, and was speaking to someone who had been sexually abused by the Christian brothers here in Perth. And when he found out that his counselor was a Christian, he asked him the plain question, how is it that you could be a Christian when it's full of all those hypocrites? The world observes the church, and the second word out of their mouth is bunch of hypocrites. We might be prepared to forgive the hypocrisy amongst us, but the world will not. And this is partially, I think, why Jesus is teaching this here. But although this teaching of Jesus is designed for all who call themselves disciples, the primary target is not just any disciples, but a specific class of disciple. Of all the people in this room that Jesus is speaking to, these particular disciples are the ones who are about to become the apostles. These are not just any disciples. These are those who will become the leaders of God's people. So of all the people in this room to whom Jesus is speaking to, of all the people that have more to worry about what it looks like to be a hypocrite, the one person in this room has got more to worry about than anybody else is me. If you're going to become, because by extension here, what Jesus is saying is that the leaders of God's people run the risk of becoming hypocrites, and Jesus is making it very plain, beware. So if I'm going to lead as a pastor or an elder or the leadership team of this church or a deacon, or I lead worship on a Sunday morning, or I'm a leader in a Christian school or a Christian hospital or a Christian whatever, and I'm a parachurch organization or a missionary, if I'm going to be someone who proclaims to be a leader of God's people, that's the primary person that Jesus is speaking about here. That's the primary person. Yes, there is application for us all, but there's a real grim warning for those of us who dare to stand in pulpits and say, I speak in the seat of Moses. His concern here is that if leaders lead with hypocrisy, can the followers be far behind? If I teach the world to live, or the church to live hypocritical lives by my examples and by my teaching, then like leaven, you will learn to live like this as well. The more power and authority and influence I have, the more potential I have for my hypocrisy to cause harm, and the more I can influence people negatively. This is why Jesus is warning his disciples. And I want you to see the circumstance in which he warns his disciples. What's going on here in this very moment where Jesus stops and he turns to his disciples first and says, beware the leaven of the Pharisees, which is hypocrisy. What's going on? It's in the text. A crowd of thousands came together so that many were stumbling over themselves. The ministry got popular. Suddenly, there's a crowd. Suddenly, it's apparent that God is blessing our ministry, and now I run the risk of turning into a giant hypocrite because of it. That's the context in which Jesus is teaching this. Because once the leaven gets in the loaf, you cannot get it out. You can't unsalt a soup. And Jesus is warning them. No habit is more easily acquired. This is Bernard de Mandeville, who was a philosopher from the 1700s. No habit is more easily acquired than hypocrisy, nor anything sooner learned than to deny the sentiments of our hearts and principle we act from. This is a secular guy who's just mouthing what Jesus said, beware the leaven of the Pharisees because it spreads so easily. And what Jesus is warning his disciples is, once your ministry gets popular, you're going to run the risk of becoming a bunch of phonies. So watch out. Let me give you an example of what this looks like. And I'm making up this example, which is easy to make up. Imagine I'm a guy and I start a church. And I happen to be a charismatic individual, and I happen to be a good preacher and a good leader. And before long, our church stops meeting in a house and it starts meeting in a building. And before long, we've got ourselves, after 3 to 5 years, a thriving, booming, growing church ministry. Thousands of people attend. We're winning people to Christ. We're baptizing people. We got great Sunday school and great children's ministries, and we're helping the poor and feeding the homeless, and we're doing all this great stuff. But I'm a hypocrite. Because behind all this kind of stuff that's going on, I'm sexually abusing some of the women in the church. But nobody knows this. And all the great ministry is going on, and it's really great ministry, and it's great stuff. And then one day, one of the women steps up and says, the pastor is doing this. Now, the elders of the church, what are they going to do? Because now they're concerned that if this gets out and they find out that this guy is doing this kind of thing, it's going to destroy all this great ministry we're doing and all this great stuff. So we'll declare that we believe in what we believe, but we need to prepare the people for this. So the pastor remains in the pulpit for 3 or 4 weeks, preaching on messages of unity and messages on gospel, gossip and messages on forgiveness. And then they tell the church what's gone on. And then they say the pastor is engaged in an inappropriate behavior and he needs to be stepped aside for a little bit. And then we have engaged in the hypocrisy of pretense on the behalf of the pastor. And we have the hypocrisy of blaming by using these passages and messages in order to control the people. And the hypocrisy of complacency, because rather than doing the real thing that requires truth-telling and honesty, and even if it meant that the whole entire church had to close its doors in order to ensure that those who were abused were cared with justice and mercy, rather than do that, we pretend to do the justice and mercy things, and we do peacekeeping instead of peacemaking, and we sweep the thing behind the door, and we blame the victims, and we do whatever it takes to keep the ministry going because the ministry is so good. I made that up. And it's easy to make up because it happens all the time, all over the place, including I heard just stories this week. When confronted, you and I believe in truth-telling until having to tell the truth will make us look bad. That's what this kind of hypocrisy looks like. When confronted with an image-threatening event, we're going to be prone to fall into the temptation of hypocrisy in order to maintain the image. We can do this as individuals, we can do this as organizations, and we can do this as systems. We engage in plausible half-truth-telling. The victims get blamed. We scapegoat things. We do all this, and we forgive ourselves for doing these things because the mission of the church is too important, or the name of the pastor is too valuable, or the image of the church is too precious. This is why Jesus is warning his leaders, his disciples, about this. Because like leaven, it spreads so easily. Because once I find out that doing these kinds of things work, I'll just do it again. And when another church comes to me and finds out that, we have a problem with our pastor, and this is what we did, and that worked for us, so the leaven spreads from one church to the next. And it seems often that these kinds of organizations are operating from a playbook, because they kind of are. The lived theology, the people and the systems behind the mask say that it's better to be a hypocrite and forgive ourselves for it than to be honest with our shortcomings and lose favor. Because the church or the ministry or Jesus might look bad if we are seen to be failures, or even worse, I might lose some personal benefit if the real truth came out. This is the risk of being popular and successful. And Jesus' warning is ageless here. And this is a warning for the leaders of his people, as well as for the people themselves. So what is the cure? Well, it's kind of implied, and it's explained here. The answer to the cure to this kind of thing is to uncover it in the first place. Because Jesus is letting his leaders know that that which you have hidden will be revealed. And he's letting the individual who sits in the church know that that which you have hidden will be revealed. God will reveal hypocrisy. So you have a choice here. You can reveal it yourself and deal with the outcomes of whatever it is you're being hypocritical about, or you can let God do it for you. But either way, the cure is exposure. It's better for leaders to be open and honest and transparent, to face and deal with any rot that may have occurred within their system and any rot that exists within themselves, and deal with it honestly, because the fallout of it being exposed against their will is going to be exponentially worse. The longer you play phony hypocritical games, whether it's in your own personal life or as a leader of God's people, the more harm you do to others, especially when it comes to light. This is compounded exponentially when one is engaging in the play acting is a leader of the people of God. Just this week, I don't know if you know a guy named Steve Lawson, if you know that name, big name in the United States, wrote books, podcasts, conferences. He's 73 years old. He was a director of one of the programs at John MacArthur's seminary. 73 years old, just stood down, committing adultery. The fallout of this, the impact of this on tens upon tens upon tens of thousands of people all over the globe, because his preaching was wonderful and he was a hypocrite. The cure here is to be authentic people, being real people. See, when we're hypocrites, we're playing a part, and the audience is each other. But in life, God is the audience, and we are just bit players with each other. And when we realize that what Jesus is saying, to love one another and care for one another and honor one another and serve one another, the point is that we're our authentic, real selves working with one another for our audience who is God. Rather than me thinking that you're the audience and your acceptance and what I need is from you. The words of Jesus are really clear here. If I think that you are my audience and you're the audience I'm playing to, I already have my reward. My reward is the acceptance of the audience. But my real audience is God, and that's the reward I want. And so the cure to this hypocrisy is to get our eyes fixed on the right audience and not on each other. I have learned this personally through hard experience. And I know for a fact that if the things I think I need to keep that are so important to me that I have to play a part to keep them, were not worth keeping in the first place. The things that are worth keeping are the real things, the honest things, the transparently open, authentic people in my life are the people I should have had in my life in the first place. To do this hard work of mask removal for the sake of the kingdom is hard work, but it's Jesus' work. Jesus makes it plain here that yes, mercy and justice and forgiveness and love and kindness and caring and unity and all those wonderful things that we think are really important in our church, and they're all Jesus gospel things, and exposing hypocritical leaders is also a Jesus thing. And the easy thing is to expose ourselves first before we get exposed for us. So let me finish with this word of hiding. Our lives are hidden with Christ in God. My life is hidden under the shelter of his wings. If I am honest and authentic and real, and you find out the real me, what do I have to lose when I have Christ? What can man do to me? And that's the thing that God is saying. Be your real me with me. God loves you the way you are. Be authentic and real with him and those others, and work through your struggles and your difficulties with others who are trustworthy and who will honor who you are as the real person. Why do you want people to know a fake you? I want to be a real me, and I want to encourage you to be real yous. Like I said at the outset here, the primary victim of this teaching is your leaders. But there's a message here for all of us to be real and authentic and honest with one another. Because this is how real community is formed. May Christ give us the strength to do it. Let me pray. Father, I thank you that you have given us your word, and I thank you for your Spirit who encourages and strengthens us as we struggle to work out our own salvation in fear and trembling. Father, I pray that you will help us to be people who find amongst ourselves and in our lives and in our spheres of influence safe and helpful individuals for whom we can be honest about our struggles and our strifes and our difficulties and our foibles and our weaknesses and our failings. And Father, we thank you that you see us in all our warty knobbiness and all our failures, and you love us just the same, and that you have given us people who love us because you love us. And Father, help us to not be hypocrites, but that the world might see that we're authentic and honest and real people who love Jesus and who loves us back. We thank you for what you do for us in Christ's name. Amen.